So after some time, I finally gave in and bought a new controller, and that was the Pioneer DDJ-SR2. And after playing on it and using it for more than a couple weeks, enough to give you an in-depth review, I've finally got my top 5 likes and dislikes of the Pioneer DDJ-SR2. Find out what those are coming up. Thank you for watching PDot TV, where you'll find tips, tricks, and tutorials for DJs and music performers. Now let's get into the video. So I've had the Pioneer DDJ-SR2 for a few weeks now, almost a couple months, and I've gotten to play on it quite a bit in that time, doing some smaller gigs, some pools where it doesn't really make sense to bring a full setup out, and I think I made the right choice. Originally I got the Roland DJ-505 and I traded in for this after some firmware issues that Roland still hasn't resolved yet. But now that I've actually played with this and gotten to know it quite a bit, I want to go ahead and give you my top 5 likes and dislikes. And let's just start out with the positives. So my first like has to be the actual metal build on this thing. So unlike the Roland 505, which is all plastic, this is a metal top plate, metal front plate, and just overall and metal jog wheels as well. So the build on this thing feels a little more sturdy and feels like it can take a little bit more abuse than something like the Roland DJ-505. Not to say that the 505, wasn't built to last, because it was still pretty rugged, but just something about having metal pieces, especially on the parts that you're going to be touching a lot, like the front, the back where the connectors are, and especially the top plate where you're, messing around with the buttons and the cues and knobs. It just feels better overall, and it feels like it's going to take a lot more abuse than something that's just a plain plastic build. So big shout out to Pioneer on that one. Loving the metal parts on this controller. My second like has to be the performance pads and the way they feel, especially the responsiveness. And I know I'm going to keep comparing it to the Roland 505, but that's because these are in the same price range and have a lot of the same feature set. Those had some issue where the pad strikes were kind of quantized, even if you had quantize off. With these, you can really tap it in and really just kind of freestyle on these pads. Not to mention the overall feel. They feel really great. They're soft, just like your MPC pads or something like that. And I love just the way they react, especially not only just the actual feel, but the light, the RGB lights as well. So you get that visual feedback as well as that tactile feedback when you're using them. My third like has to be the output options on this controller. So the first SR only had 1/4 inch outs as the main output, but now you actually get all 3 options, which is awesome. So not only do you get your 1/4 inches and your booth in RCA, but you get those almighty XLR outs. So that's going to give you a bigger, louder, and punchier output, all on the same controller. So I'm really glad to see that all 3 options are on the controller, especially at this price. I mean, even some of Pioneer's mixers at this price don't have all 3 of these options. So that makes this a good value, especially when you're using it live for maybe some mobile gigs like that. It just gives you way more flexibility to have all 3 instead of just being limited to, say, just 1/4 inches as your main outs. Now the fourth like I would have to say is the overall weight and feel of this controller. It has some weight to it, but it's not too heavy, even with the metal, and just the overall size. It's not necessarily small enough to fit in a backpack, but you can put it in a really small travel case or just carry it under your shoulder like this, and it's not too big, and it just feels right. And I'm not that big of a fan of the controllers like the SX, where you get 4 channels, because I know 9 times out of 10 for the way I am going to use a controller, all I need are 2 channels. So having something that has the build quality and the kind of nice weight to it, but not having that bigger overall size is just a plus in my book. So I love this form factor for a controller. It's bigger than your entry-level controllers, but it feels better too. Like, it feels a little bit more professional and you have a little bit more room, but it's not too big where it's just cumbersome and hard to carry around. So if you're looking for a controller with some size to it, but that's not too big, this is a great choice. And then finally, my fifth like with this controller is the fact that this now has Serato DJ DVS support. So if you buy the club kit or you buy the DVS support for this, as you can see on the back, you have inputs, 1 for each channel, so you can plug in turntables like these or a media player like an XDJ or a CDJ and get full DVS support out of this. So this is really great, especially for people that are just starting with DJing. this controller right here will let you learn and will grow with you, because if you just start with the controller and say you want to learn turntables later on, or you want to learn CDJs, you don't have to go out and buy a full mixer, because this can be the mixer for you. You just buy that one DVS upgrade for a little bit over $100, I believe, and you're good to go. Just plug in your turntables or media player of choice and get going on Serato right away without having to buy another piece of hardware, which is always great. So if you're thinking about taking DJing more serious later down the line, this is a good way to get from the very beginning to learning how to use things like turntables or media players. Okay, so now let me talk about things that I don't like about this controller. It's great, but it's not perfect in every way. So the first thing up has to be these pitch faders. Now, they are a good length. They're bigger than some of the entry-level pitch faders like you would see on the DDJ-SR2 or that series, but they're not full length. So even though you can dial in a pretty good, lock in the pitch you're looking for and the BPM you're looking for, it still doesn't feel as comfortable as having a full length pitch fader, especially if you want to make the jump to something like a CDJ, the 2000 Nexus or something like that has that full pitch fader length. It's going to take a little bit of time to get used to. I know that's my one major gripe with this controller, is that I really wish we had full length pitch faders on this. Even though I can dial it in, just the familiarity and just knowing where I am and getting it right is just kind of missing on this because of this shorter pitch fader that you find on some of these mid-range controllers. My second dislike with this controller is the fact that there is no hardware hamster switch or crossfader reverse switch. So on the Roland DJ505, you actually get crossfader reverse or hamster switch on it, but this one you don't get one. You actually have to go into Serato and reverse it in the hardware. And even though it doesn't take that long to do it, it's kind of cumbersome when, especially like me, I mix regular but I scratch reverse. So if I want to do some cuts, I have to go in the software and toggle that setting, then get back out of it, then do my cuts, then switch it back again when I'm done. It just isn't really practical in that sense, where on that DJ505 it's just one flick of a switch like on any mixer. It's just kind of missing on this, so I really wish it had that. I find myself not wanting to cut as much because of it, and it's just, they could have put it anywhere. There's so much room up here. They could have just fit it just like they do on the SX series, but I get it, maybe it's cost cutting, whatever, but I really wish this had a crossfader reverse. My third gripe with this would have to be the actual metering on the actual controller. It's okay, but it's not as bright as it should be, and just overall it doesn't feel as correct. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the visual response from this I don't feel like is as nice as you would get on something like a regular mixer. And it's a gripe that I have with a lot of controllers out there. I really wish there was longer meters like you find on something like the higher end controllers. Maybe they separated a little bit or just have a different setup, but I just don't feel like I'm getting the visual response to really dial in my gains and dial in my volumes, especially in a situation where I might not have a monitor and I'm really relying on the metering and the lights on here. I kind of second guess myself a little bit, and I find myself having to get used to what these lights mean in comparison to what I'm hearing out of the actual speakers. So if you don't really care about that stuff and you just kind of auto gain and all of that, and you're not really using the meters as much, maybe it doesn't affect you, but I know that I like using this in conjunction with my ears, and with these meters I second guess myself a little bit. So that's something I hope they improve on the next version. And while speaking about the brightness, overall the brightness of the actual pads could use some work. In the direct sun, especially like out here in Vegas, if you're playing something like a pool, it's really hard to see what color your pads are and like the pad modes and things like that. Stuff like that where you need that visual feedback, it's kind of lacking. I know I'm like putting my hand over this so I can see what color everything is, and that's just not something that you need to be worrying about in the middle of your performance or the middle of you DJing and playing records. So that's something that I find myself having to just double check, make sure I'm in the right pad mode, especially a DJ like me that likes to switch from hot cues to roll so I can get my beat jumps and back, or maybe jump into the sampler. Not having the proper visual feedback and not seeing if I have cue points set because the LEDs are a little too dim can be a little frustrating, and that's even with the power supply connected, which is supposed to make everything brighter. It's still not bright enough in my opinion. I'm talking about even in shade, if it's just too bright outside, you still can have a little hard time, getting visual feedback from these pads. So hopefully they can, make these pads a little bit brighter in the next version, because I know, especially out here, definitely need it. And then finally, my last gripe with this controller has to be the kind of LED light feedback you get with the actual platters. With the SX2 and the higher end controllers, you actually get feedback along, the rim, or right here where it kind of gives you positioning like you would get in Serato or even on the CDJs. But this one is just light on and off, depending if you have the faders up or not. So it's kind of like fader start, light response. But that kind of feedback really isn't that useful. I'd rather be able to see my positioning with the record, or platter I should say, especially if I'm like cutting and I don't want to keep looking back and forth at my computer. Having that visual feedback on the jog wheel helps out tremendously. And they even put the LEDs in here, and it just makes me kind of sad that they could have done way more with it and made it way more responsive, way more useful. So hopefully in the next version, that's something they fix and give you the kind of feedback that you get from, say, something like the SX series, where you get that, position feedback on the actual jog wheels themselves. So that's a look at my top 5 likes and dislikes of the Pioneer DDJ-SR2. So question of the day, what controller do you use? Go and leave that down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, if you found this video useful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, go ahead and click right here to subscribe to this channel. Or if you'd like to watch more content, go ahead and click on that video right there. And thank you for watching PDot TV, where you'll find tips, tricks, and tutorials for DJs and music performers. See you next time.